Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly, and we're back with another Casting Angles with Mac Brown. Mac, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Marvin?
As always, just trying to stay out of trouble, and we're back again. Got to stay cool.
Got to stay cool. The temperature's been rising a little bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sure has. I think it's actually supposed to cool off again towards the end of the week, but I think we're getting ready to get into the dog days of summer. We'll just have to figure out how deep into September we're going to get before it breaks. But we were talking before we started recording, and we were having kind of a fishing casting nerd conversation about fishing drifts over fish, and kind of like two different ways to basically work on that drift. And the situation we were talking about is, as we move into summer, and if you're going to still fish for trout, it's going to get more and more technical, right? So you kind of have to really kind of dial in your presentation game. And we were talking about, what do you do when you see that fish rising regularly on the far side of the river, and like, what's the plan of attack to get a good drift to that fish?
Yeah. That'd be a good topic, because a specific target like that's already coming up. There's a lot of tools you can do with, like you could reach, you could pile it in, you could do a pile cast, reach man. You can add modules, one after the other on top of the other, like a pile cast followed with a reach, and then drag and drop if you had to. You're just looking at 24, 30 inches of drift with something like that scenario. And then you have, the tools like where you're talking about a short drift. And is that an easy occurrence to teach somebody? Absolutely, because you're only talking about 30, 40 inches. And then you got the other extreme, like what we use a lot here in this part of the country, like in Appalachia, where we're looking at how do we cover for what I call the granddaddy drift, where it goes 30, 40 feet now with no drag. Now there's a whole lot of different tools involved, of dancing line mends and a lot of things to pull that off. So I think when we talk about these things, that's why that was a fun conversation before we started. Just, talking about, there isn't it's always variable, Marvin. There's not a single answer. That's what I think makes it hard to get people to do these things. It's like there's not a singular thing, It's like, what is it we're trying to do? First of all, what's the goal?
Yeah, I would say too that, regardless of whether you're looking for a 40 or 50 or 60 foot drift, or you're fishing to a riser, I think the first thing to do is to actually think about, to your point, what we're going to do, right? And then to try to position yourself, whether, if you're in a boat, it's a little bit easier, but if you're waiting, try to, first of all, position yourself to make the cast easier, right?
Yep.
And, you and I were talking about, if you've got a riser across the river from you, probably the hardest approach, if you've got any meaningful current between you and that fish on that soft water on the far side, is being perpendicular to that fish, because you're going to get a lot of drag, right? So the first thing you want to do, right, is move downstream and make your life a lot easier, right?
Either move downstream or be above it, one or the other, but not so much perpendicular.
Yeah. And so, once you do that, and you and I were talking, then, it's a relatively simple matter, because, you're watching that fish, they generally tend to rise relatively regularly. And so you basically start to plan, like, when, you want that fly kind of in the zone, right? And to your point, if you've got room to cast beyond the fish, you can almost kind of hold it, almost like the flies at a traffic light, and then just lift your rod line and pull it into the lane when you're ready and let it drift, right?
Right.
Or you can throw a reach mend, right? But, whatever you need to do to kind of keep that line that's in the middle of the river, so if you're going to want to mend that downstream if you're fishing upstream, to keep that big belly out of line to solve that 24 to 36 inch problem. But, as you and I were talking, what you were talking about is like, well, hey, let's talk about like all the comp guys I fish with and all the, really, really serious anglers. They're much more efficient because they're actually maximizing the drift for a longer distance.
Yeah, for a long, long period of time. And I guess the recipe for that, for those listening, is basically like I had a 7-year-old today. That's what led us into talking about this to start with his daddy. And the 7-year-old, I know that sounds really young, like too little to start, but I mean, he picked up and implemented a lot of this that we're talking about just so quick, because that's what he thought it was. So you tell him this is what you do, and he could do it. And so the rod tip is never, ever sitting still. And I told him, when we started out, we're doing dry dropper this morning. And I said, as long as you're constantly repositioning that line to pull off magic, because around this part of the country, it's more about pulling off these long drifts because you don't know exactly where they are because you're not seeing fish coming up left and right in a lot of these park streams, like out of the national parks. So I think that really, clicked with him, is saying, look, we do this. Dancing lineman is when you just flip the tip up over and over. So back to what you described about a fast current and you got some soft water on the far side, you could sit there and just flip the tip up over and over in a rhythm. And the current's not an issue then because the line's always out in the air more than it is the water. Does that kind of make sense? And that way people start to get an idea that, oh, that's how you pull off a long float.
Yeah. And I think too, what you do is we were talking about this before recording, really what you're trying to do is to get the leader and the working part of the fly line basically parallel to that current that you're trying to match.
Yep. Yeah, that helps. That helps big time.
Yeah. And so, literally just flipping those mends where you're basically flipping the first part of that line that's getting ready to drag and basically flipping it parallel, right? To that current is what's going to help you keep that longer drift.
Yeah. And then feeding. Of course, the feeding part's at after it starts to get below you, 20 degrees, 30 degrees below you. And then the flipping it up, dancing line men with actually feeding line out while you're going. You know what I mean? That's how we extend these long drifts. I had that little kid today actually feeding line out. That's how we were able to go really long distance, down. And then, of course, it paid off. This is not the best time of year being in, July 7th or something today? It's it's a whole lot better activity, in the spring. But if you pull off the floats like we're talking about, just pull off magic where it's going a long way, and you have a dry dropper on, good things are going to happen. So he ended up picking up a lot of fish doing that, just because that's really the game. Like, the longer you can keep it going, looking natural, then the more fish you're going to catch. It's that simple. Like, if a drift only goes 3 feet versus 30 feet, who's going to catch more fish? And it's like that kid really understood that by the time the day was over. And I think that was the fun part about having a kid so young. A lot of people get bummed when a kid's that little, but I actually like it because they tend to, if you describe it right to them, they end up capitalizing on it pretty quick.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing too, folks, is if it's not as trouty a time of year in our neck of the woods, but the great thing is that kind of takes the pressure off, because these are things that are really, really hard to practice if you're not on the water. So if you go out to fish, thinking that I'm going to work on these skills and catching a fish as a bonus, it's going to really, really pay dividends in October and November when the water cools off and the fish are a lot more active.
That's right. It's good for skill development in the off season. That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah. And so, before you run and pick your son up who's lifeguarding, I don't want you to get in trouble. I know that you're guiding this summer. And I know you've got schools in the fall. You want to let folks know where they can reach out and get in touch to get on the water with you before the school started to learn more and get a slot in one of your guide schools or one of your skill schools this fall.
Sure. That's easy with the URL, macbrownflyfish.com or flyfishingguideschool.com. Either one will have links to both pages and all the different programs coming up with 5-day schools, 2-day casting schools. There's a White River school there in October that's a 3-day wet fly school with Davey Watton and myself. And we're looking forward to all those coming up. It's going to be a lot better time of year.
Yeah, and so, folks, as I always say this time of year, first of all, stay cool. But remember to get out there and catch a few. Tight lines, everybody. Tight lines, Mac.
Tight lines, Marvin.